A very good morning, everyone. Welcome all of you to the Department of English of Bodoland University. So I have been given an arduous job by my colleague and convener of this seminar, Dr. Devajyoti Biswas. So I have a small way of understanding nationalism. So this is considered to be one of the most powerful ideology in the last couple of centuries. And while talking about that, we have varieties of nationalism like liberal reactionary, and radical. And to explain it better, I will say that so this is much more than extreme patriotism. And nationalism, as we know, still seems to be a powerful influence in the 21st century. And how powerful it is, we know more or less. We have experienced more or less. I do not want to talk those things directly because I might land in problem. But I'll try to talk something in a broader perspective, not referring to the country like India. So this is, first of all about belonging to a place which is definable and familiar, and as against a place which is strange and remote. And primarily, nationalism is a political principle, and it has two divisions. One is a political unit, and another is the national unit, and which should be congruent to each other. And this is a sentiment or a feeling aroused by violation of the principle. So naturally, so it is quite natural for the people who are the members of the nation that they have deep emotional ties to it. So in a way, if we want to talk about that, this is considered to be very complex. So this has political implications. It requires some form of political expression. And when we do express things politically, we do express through certain institutions. And we know that as we go deep into that, we understand that this is a kind of ideology. And we know what ideology is. So when there is the question of ideology relating to nationalism, it has its own worldviews. And there are certain coherent ideas relating to it, coherent ideas, values, which give certain meaning to it. So this is the meaning that is related to the past, and that explains the present, and that also offers possible future action. So nationalism, in a way, we can say it is irrational, emotional, and it is always deep into passion. That is what we have been experiencing, not only in a country like India, but also abroad. So nationalism is a kind of loyalty to the nation, and when we have I'm talking about the positive side now, so when we have this kind of loyalty, so naturally the political considerations naturally come next, nation first. And nation is the only a proper basis for organization of any political activity. So if you look at 20th century, this 20th century is an era of total warfare, strengthened nationalism at the time. It's an era of total warfare that strengthens nationalism. Value of nation as political unit is also questioned at the same time. And nationalism as a valid ideology for human affairs is also challenged at the same time. And the hostility to nationalism grew during the century, especially after the world wars. So nationalism is very powerful, and this is a kind of ideology which is not small and microscopic. It is rather a kind of widespread ideology that is challenging and defeating other ideologies which might be smaller than this. And this remains entirely pervasive, rather. So, in this context, I would like to say that at some point or other, if you look at the history of nations, that it is also diluted, particularly when there is what we call migration. For example, so when most of the people are migrating to a country like US for job purpose or maybe for the purpose of study, so the question arises to what extent nationalism remains intact. It does not remain intact, and we cannot keep it intact also. Sometimes it gets stronger, sometimes it gets diluted because of so many phenomena. So this is threatened by large-scale migration into other countries, so where there are opportunities. So on the other hand, so nationalism provokes a kind of debate among political scientists, and the political scientists think as to who benefits from nationalism as an ideology. And when nationalism comes up, so naturally modernization is also there. Modernization is something that we cannot stop. So in that context, we see that modernization and at the same time traditional national identity, those do not go together. So there come up a lot of conflict in that. So the point is that, so how to negotiate that? We have to be modernized, and modernized, as we understand, is a kind of Europeanization. That may be, but at the same time, how we can embed both? We'll have to retain our identity, but at the same time there is the onslaught of European values, because we'll have to go for modernization. We cannot stop that. So we'll have to develop a kind of strategy in that direction, as I understand. So the political uses of nationalist ideology depend on how one sees it in relation to other major ideological traditions. This is the all-pervasive ideology that remains, but at the same time we have so many other smaller ideologies. So the whole point is that, so there is a diversion of the focus. So when the flow of nationalism is going on, other smaller ideologies do not survive. So conservatives, for example, they assert that nationalism creates social cohesion and social order. All people have a place and valued role in the nation. The organic nature of the nation must be upheld as being natural social unit. Conservatives do not accept patriotism, and nationalism must lead to aggression and imperialism. So nevertheless, nationalism in the 19th century Britain was used by the conservatives as part of popular imperialism to encourage political support for themselves and to support overseas expansion. So this is how nationalism also works. So nationalism, looking at from another angle, it has also psychological appeal. So nationalism is such that either it keeps people elated, fighting for the nation, talking about the nation, singing the song of the nation, that is all right up to a certain point. But at the same time, we don't feel that there is a kind of digression. We move away from reality. So how long we will go on flying above? So this is something ambivalent. The ground reality is that we have suffering. The ground reality is that we have our own problems to address. So when the flow of nationalism goes on, we simply bypass those things. So those are some of the problems of nationalism. So we develop nationalism because of, as I said, because of collective consciousness, and there are national groups who stimulate the consciousness of national differences, and there is feeling of us and them division. If we are nationalists, we consider ourselves, we have our own configuration. We don't allow anybody to configure something different. We say that we are us, and the other who are not subscribing to nationalism, they are the other. So with that kind of configuration, we go on. So feeling of us and them division, that always goes on. And there are superiority over peoples of other nations. And as nationalists, we feel that we are superior to other people. We had such kind of civilization. We do not, our civilization, the glory of civilization doesn't exist now, that may be, but we had such glory. So in that process, what we do is that we ignore the other nations' other values. So that kind of assimilation does not take place. So in the history of the world, we have seen the conflict of nationalism. So there was Irish nationalism that was against English power, English and French, Turk and Greek, Serb and Bosnian Muslims, Indian and Pakistani. This is an ongoing process that has been going on, and we are not able to settle anything because of nationalism. So we go on cheering of victories. There is a war between two nations. We do not look at things because of nationalism. We do not look at things from humanitarian point of view. We do not accept values. We do not accept people. We go on cheering. When there is a war taking place, one is defeated. The other goes on cheering. When there is cricket, so that sort of thing also goes on. We never learn to accept both victory and defeat. And there is a brooding of defeats in that way. So the process of nationalism is also stimulated by myths, by flags, national anthems, martial art, music, images of the country, usually rural rather than urban, national stereotyping of the members of other nations. Such kind of process also goes on. So nationalism comes with self-determination. If you're looking at the other angle, this present state is very important, and within the state there is a political organization, and we go for national self-determination, and we try to strengthen the validity of the state as an expression of nationhood, and the nation is governed by men of their own country and nation. So that is the feeling, and the feeling that the outsiders should not rule, and they share the same language as them rather than by strangers. So if this desirable state could not be achieved peacefully, then what we do? Then it was to be prosecuted by war. We go for war. And we do not think of the loss of mankind or anything of that sort. So nationalism in a way gives us, looking at the other angle, it gives us freedom, it gives us wealth, it gives us power. And if you look at history, the 19th century Europe was characterized by the rise of nationalism as an ideology. So nationalism acquired legitimacy after the First World War, and the preamble to the UN Charter claims that its members reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal right of men and women, and of nations, large and small. So, if we go back in time and look at the international politics, again, we see nationalism developed in its modern form during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. That was first in France, then among the enemies of France, and nationalism was mobilized. And that mobilized the powerful emotion of loyalty and fighting for a cause. And by 1815, all the nations of Europe had become carriers of ideological nationalism. And evidently, the 19th century was the major formative era of modern nationalism. So nationalism contributed to increasing rivalry and suspicion between the great powers, as we have seen during 1914 and before that even. And it promoted conflict by stressing the differences between nations, and it also stimulated arms races and the building of alliances. And nationalism did not make war inevitable, but it made war more difficult to avoid. It became a struggle for whole nations, for national self-determination, and the war was intensified by becoming an ideological struggle of people, of popular passions, of national right. Any questioning of the motive for which the war was fought, any demand for peace was likely to be suppressed. So that is the thing that goes on. That is what we do for the sake of nationalism. And more destructive in this context was, as I want to say, the Second World War. There was the rise of the fascists and the Nazis. And they used nationalism to strengthen their idea of the world being made up of nations struggling for survival. So, looking at from different angles, I will again say nationalism is a distraction from the class struggle. I was saying earlier, sometime before, that nationalism remains a bigger ideology and it overlooks the smaller ideologies. And that is, so when the wind of nationalism blows, so naturally that is a distraction from the class struggle. And that becomes a means of manipulation, manipulating the working class. And it diverts it from the reality of its exploitation by the bourgeois. And that is what is happening in 20th century and when we go for nationalism. And this became identified with reaction, aggression, intolerance. So these are the things those come along with nationalism. Reaction, aggression, intolerance, war, religious bigotry, and atrocity. So nationalism has naturally, as I have said, multifarious interpretations. And so it has a force of division and aggression embedded in it. And the worst effect of nationalism is that the minority group suffer a lot. The minority group is perceived outside the larger national community, and they are threatened by nationalist fervor. And nationalism may have arisen out of the 18th century, but it represents the dark alternative of the rationalism of the Enlightenment. So, nationalism is still a major force in the world affairs. there are powerful economic and cultural forces undermining nationalism, usually described as globalization, developing around multinational corporations, banks, insurance companies, global communication, and the dominance of the English language. And in this context, we have not just nationalism, alongside it there are regional nationalism also, and that is another subspecies of nationalism. This refers to a claim for regional autonomy which nevertheless stops short of outright independence. So nationalism as a whole is considered to be a powerful force and countervailing force to the insidious process of economic and cultural globalization. And against this background, I'll say that there is a profound changes in this as a source of dignity, and the positive side of the nationalism is that this becomes a source of dignity, security, and social cohesion, and it is not likely to fade away in this century anyway. I hope that this international seminar will provide a platform for a good discussion and interaction, and we will have better understanding of the whole concept. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I thank Professor Patra for introducing the topic of the seminar.